Hello, everyone. Welcome to another installment of Open Air presented by the Harvey B. Gantt Center in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm Dexter Wimberly and very happy to introduce you to today's guest. Adrienne Nieves was born in 1982 in San Antonio, Texas. She's a visual artist and writer whose interdisciplinary practice explores the interior landscapes of the self. A self-taught painter, she began painting in 2011 as a form of art therapy during recovery from postpartum depression and a bipolar disorder diagnosis. What began as a personal healing evolved into a deeper investigation of emotional suppression and memory, influenced by artists such as Joan Mitchell, Cy Twombly, Alma Thomas, and Mary Lovelace O'Neill. Nieves works across painting, writing, self-sculpture, and text-based media. Her abstract expressionist work approach embraces vulnerability, healing, and nonlinear narratives. Text often appears in her work as fragments, sometimes legible, sometimes obscured, reflecting the complexity of self-expression. Adrienne's work has been exhibited internationally at venues including Consortium Museum in France, Art Basel in Switzerland, Hong Kong, and Miami, Frieze in London and Seoul, Gallery Margot in Paris, various small fires in Los Angeles, Standing Pine Gallery in Tokyo, and Bode Projects in Berlin. Her work is held in collections across North America, Europe, and Asia. Her most recent show, Black Lilith Rising, is on view at Albion June in London through November 26, 2025. Her exhibition, A Time for Furious Dancing, is on view at the Harvey B. Gantt Center in Charlotte through January 4th, 2026. Without further ado, let's welcome Adrienne Nieves to today's Open Air.
Hello.
Hey, how are you? Welcome back.
Oh, thank you. It's good to be back.
Yeah, for those who don't know, this isn't your first open air, but it's actually good timing because, as I mentioned in the introduction, your solo show opened at the Gantt Center recently, and you just had another solo exhibition opening at a gallery, commercial gallery in London. So there's a lot of interesting things going on with you in your career that I'd love to talk about today. But let me just kind of hand it over to you for a moment to just
Mhm.
give you an opportunity to introduce yourself. I mean, of course, there will be people familiar with you, but for those joining us for the first time, maybe you can share a little bit about who you are and the work that you do.
Yeah, of course. So my name is Adrienne Nieves. I am 42 years old, mother of three. I have been painting for this is my 15th year. I grew up primarily doing other types of creative and performing arts, but I started painting about 15 years ago and kind of took over most of my creative practice and most of my life in like the best kind of ways. Um, yeah, I love painting. Over the last, couple of years, I've started branching out into working with other mediums and materials, and kind of just experimenting and exploring. And so I've been having a really great time with that. Uh, you know, my biggest hope with my work is that, it connects with people and it helps people, be grounded and connected to and in touch with their inner self and with their emotions. So yeah, it's a little bit about me and a little bit about my work overall.
As thank you, and as I mentioned, you have an exhibition that's currently on view at the Gantt Center. And for folks who don't know much about that show, I'd love to just take a few moments and let's talk a little bit about A Time for Furious Dancing. Obviously, at some point in today's conversation, we'll have some images to refer to, but let's just kind of get into a little bit of a background about that show. Can you tell us a little bit about that title? And also the inspirations behind some of the works you made specifically for that show.
Definitely. So I will say first with just the title, A Time for Furious Dancing, comes from or is derived from a book by Alice Walker of poems and prose that she wrote during a year where she experienced a lot of loss and grief. And she was also, witnessing a lot of tragedies and social justice issues and disruptions, around the world. And so she wrote this collection of poems and prose. And the book itself is called Hard Times Require Furious Dancing. And so that book and that title specifically, when I first saw it and when I started reading the book, just the concept of it, as well as the things that she was talking about, from grief and loss to finding moments and pockets of joy to, gardening. Like she talks about all these different experiences that she's having and that she's witnessing. And I read that book during uh, really the not really necessarily the height of the pandemic. I would say about a year and a half into it. And by that time, me and my family, because I'm immunocompromised and two of my family members are also high risk. So we took a very isolationist approach to the pandemic. And so, we wound up having to homeschool our kids, pulling them out of public school. And, we were kind of shut off from a lot of like our family and friends and the communities that we had been a part of. And so we had already been living pretty much in isolation for about a year and a half, almost 2 years. And the impacts of that were definitely weighing on me. And I was dealing with a lot of anger and a lot of grief and a lot of just confusion, not just around the pandemic itself and isolation, but also just, witnessing everything that we had in 2020, right? A lot of the things that were fracturing and a lot of the social contracts that had been dissolving. During that time, during that year, around public health, around racial justice, the election, there was just so much going on. And reading that book really helped me begin to process the things that that had kind of been like compounding on top of each other for me during that time. And I started reading it, and as I was reading it and starting to process those things, uh, I was able to kind of start pouring that out in the studio in like bits and pieces. And so a lot of the works in this show, in the Gantt show in particular, they were originally on view at the Consortium Museum in France. And I really wanted that show to be an encapsulation of sorts of what that process was like for me. And so there's elements, like I said, there's some joy, there's some There's some grief, there's some rage and some anger. There's also some resignation and acceptance. There's pain and there's triumph mixed in there. Um, and so the title is really just a way to reference that book and its influence on me and how it influenced me, not just personally, but also creatively.
And what brought you to thank you. And what brought you to abstraction as a method of art making? Can you talk a little bit about that journey? Did you start there? Were you doing something else?
I came to abstraction purely by, I would say, accident. I did not grow up really doing any kind of visual art. I primarily was focused on like writing and debate and drama in school, doing theater, doing dance. So I was really focused more on like performance based arts as well as writing. So, I didn't really do a lot of painting or drawing. In fact, I was quite terrible at it in grade school. But in my mid 20s, a therapist recommended to me that I find something constructive to do with my hands to help me manage some of the symptoms that I was experiencing, as related to my mental health. And I tried crocheting and doing like some knitting for a couple of weeks, and that was just way too tedious. And so I was like, nope, that doesn't work. And I had picked up some really cheap craft paint supplies at the same time I picked up some yarn. And I just started playing around and experimenting with that. And so I came to painting purely from a expressive arts therapy type of experience. It was really just therapeutic to begin with, and then over time, um, I started to understand that it really was an extension of my creative voice and really like another type of home for my creative voice to express itself through, in addition to writing, and especially when writing was becoming increasingly more difficult. And I was struggling to find language to articulate, a language that I could write about, to help people kind of understand some of the things that I was experiencing and witnessing. I There were things that were just really hard to write about, but were becoming very easy for me to paint about, if that makes sense. So, abstraction is something that I stumbled onto, or I feel like it found me. And it definitely was something that was easy for me um, to engage in, primarily because that's I don't draw, right? So it's not like I didn't like take any lessons or anything like that. It literally just started with me just playing around with paint on my hands and kind of just moving them around on these really small pieces of paper and like particle board.
And we talked about this a bit in our prior discussion at the Gantt Center, the influence of literature on your work. I mean, so much of
Mhm.
your work does feel like writing. The paintings feel like text.
Mhm.
And I'd love to hear a little bit about that. Like, who are some of your literary influences, and how does that work? How does their writing find its way into your work?
Yeah, I would say over the last 3 to 4 years, my literary references have definitely become primarily Black authors, Black feminist thinkers and writers, James Baldwin, Audre Lorde, June Jordan, Alice Walker, and other contemporaries from that time, and also even some who are writing today, like Roxane Gay, um, Cole Arthur Riley. Um, uh, there's definitely a lot of um, black thought and black genius that I focus on. I tend to metabolize. I kind of think of it as a way to, I went to college for. I got my associate's degree, and then I transferred to a 4 year school, but I didn't finish and get my bachelor's degree. And so I look at The reading that I do now is kind of a way to just do my own type of self education, as if I had stayed in college and maybe taken an African
Mm.
American study course, or something like that. I have challenged myself to kind of go back and do the reading, as you know, we would say. So definitely a lot of Black writers and authors. But I would say, I was the kid who always had, their head in a book. My dad would tell me to go outside, and I would have a book under my arm, and I would sit on the porch, and I would read. Friends from the neighborhood would have to like pry me off the porch and pry the book out of my hands. I've always loved reading. I've always loved writing, and so I would say one of the other literary sources is really myself. And writing has always been a source of both like liberation, but also a source of pain for me at times. And so sometimes it's harder for me to engage with it and to stick with it. Um, but I'm finding that pairing it with my visual work helps me write. It helps me uh, not avoid it, because yeah, writing can be a challenge these days.
So, in addition to the literary influences, there's another element to your work that I always find quite interesting, and that is the physicality of the work. There are some
Mhm.
videos that I've seen and we've shared in the past of you making your paintings, and it's like a full body experience.
Mhm.
And how does that affect your relationship to your work? The fact that it is so involved in that way.
I would say early on, it's interesting because, like I said, when I first started, I literally, started painting with just my hands, and that tactile input, that feeling, that sensation of paint on my fingers and using them to, apply the paint to the surface and move it around. That was very physically therapeutic for me, somatically, like in my body. Like I felt very calm. My mind started to quiet down. It was like a release valve for me. And so for, I would say, the first, you know 8 to 10 years of my painting practice, I was working pretty small,
Hmm.
but mostly just using like my arms and like my hands. It wasn't really a full body process like right away, but the physical element was still there. Um, Around 2018, 2019 is when I started to work bigger, and I found that just because of physics, right? Like you need to be able to stretch farther to reach a corner of a canvas, or you need to bend down lower to make a mark in the opposite corner. So I found that as I started to work bigger, that's when painting became more of a full body type of experience and process. I also started to understand how critical movement is for me. Movement is helpful for me, not just for the physical health benefits, but also as a neurodivergent person. Movement helps me think, it helps me process. And so once I started understanding that part of myself, and how that helped me understand how that also fits into how I paint. It's very intensive, but just a lot of just somatically, it's very helpful. It helps me release things. I've had therapists in the past tell me, that, hey, when you're dealing with a lot of trauma, or when you've been through a lot of trauma, it tends to sit in the body and it needs somewhere to go. And so movement helps with that as well. And so working in the studio on really large pieces, and being able to stretch and move my arms and my legs, and to you know throw my body around in a sense, and make marks on the canvas, and even press my body into the canvas, like, just really helps with that as well. I'm able to kind of give it everything that I've got.
Tell me a little bit about Black Lilith Rising, the exhibition on view in London. What's the, tell me about the title, tell me about the works in the show, and then we're going to actually go into looking at some images of your work because I want to make sure we have time for the
Okay.
images.
Yeah, definitely. So Black Lilith Rising is a brand new set of works. The show at the Gantt is really a nice little synopsis of what my work and practice have been like over the last like 3 to 5 years. So there's works in the Gantt show that are really from the last like 3 to 4 years and cover a range of topics that I have explored during that time, and especially like a particular way that I've painted. So I feel like the Gantt show was a really nice like bookend, if that makes sense, of what my
Mm,
practice has been like. And the show in London, Black Lilith Rising, is, I look at it as a reintroduction or like a little bit of a rebirth in a sense. It's a way for me to point people towards where I'm headed, kind of the new horizons, the new ideas, the new mediums, that I'm exploring and that I'm experimenting with. So this show has paintings, which of course people are used to from me, but it also has my first set of soft sculptures, which I'm very excited about. And a little nervous about, but excited about nonetheless. Um, and so, there's paintings, but there's also these soft sculptures, these giant piles of hand crocheted, chunky, soft yarns. And there's also some soft sculptures that have also like a hardened element, so like cast iron hooks. And I've taken like nylons and thread and kinetic sand and kind of have combined them to create these really soft, squeezable um, uh, objects that resemble like meat. And I'll explain that in a moment. um, but yeah, so that's the show. It's paintings and it's soft sculptures, and really excited for people to see them. And the title comes from a few sources, but essentially, this show, the inspirations for it come from astrology, come from ancient Mesopotamian texts, particularly the tale of Inanna's descent. She was a
mm,
Sumerian goddess, and there's this tale about how she descends into the underworld and she has to go through these seven gates of the underworld. And as she goes through each gate, she is stripped of her adornments of her, because on earth, above she is a queen. But when she's going through the seven gates of the underworld, she's being stripped of all of those things. And when she gets through the seventh gate, she's standing in front of her sister, Ereshkigal, and she has judgment cast upon her, and Ereshkigal kills her and hangs her body on a meat hook, and she eventually is brought back to life, and so it's essentially like a story of being reborn, right? Like going through something very difficult, but resurrecting, being reborn. The parallels are, of course, the planet Venus and its retrograde journey. Even in the Bible, Jesus and his 40 days and 40 nights in the wilderness. There's also, Persephone and, the journey into, spring, right? So there's a lot of parallels to it. So that's one literary source that's an inspiration for this show, and then the other is comes from a poem by Sonia Sanchez, and it comes from a poem that's called "Wounded in the House of a Friend," and towards the end of the poem. There's this refrain that she has, and it says, I have become a collector of me. I shall become a collector of me. I shall become a collector of me. And she repeats it over and over. And then at the very last line, it says, I shall become a collector of me and put meat on my soul. And so those two references to meat, we have, this one where this goddess's body, she's killed and her body is hung on a hook, on a meat hook. And then, um, we have this other woman talking about how, she is kind of reclaiming parts of herself and parts of her life, and she's putting meat on her soul. Those two ideas, those two things, really spoke
Hmm.
to me at this point in my life, and so I use those two references to kind of build this world and these works for the show.
And so I want to thank you for that. I want to get the slideshow queued up here and talk a little bit about um, the recent works that you've been describing. So for each of
Yeah.
these images, maybe you can just take a moment to ground us in what we're, title, scale, just kind of give an idea of what we're looking at.
Yeah. So this first one is the neon. Let's dance our way back home. So this one is really referencing the title of the show and really the inspiration for it. Hard times require furious dancing. So I wanted to create something that would allow me to integrate text, but also kind of speak to that, to the energy of the show.
And talk a little bit about your use of neon, which is something that obviously has kind of been sort of recurring in your work as of late. Um, what brought you to that as a medium?
I really wanted to try to find a way to bring my written work um, to my visual work in a way that felt organic, and in a way that felt like the words uh, could have their own presence, like their own presence, their own energy, versus just writing on directly on the canvas and either covering it up or leaving it to be legible for people to see. I wanted to kind of take that further and see how could I bring the two together, but also pair them in ways that would allow them to stand apart, even as they were together. And so I back in 2019 I saw uh, some neon works by Mary Weatherford for the first time in person. And that kind of sent me down a rabbit hole, because when I saw her work, I was like, oh, I really like this. But in my mind, I immediately I thought about text. And
Hmm.
so that sent me, kind of down a rabbit hole to see who else was doing neon text, and maybe even like with paint. And so of course, like I started learning about Glenn Ligon's work. Alex Bell is another artist who does another Black artist who uses neon text a lot. And so I really wanted to find a way to bring the two together. And I was able to reach out to Light Bright Neon in Kingston, New York, and kind of present them with my first idea that I had, like, hey, I want to, I was like, I don't even know if this is possible, but I have this painting and I want to put neon text on it. And, how can that happen? And they've been really great collaborative partners. And so every time I email them, like, hey, I have another phrase that I want to put it on this painting, and they help me, bring the idea to life. So it's something that I really enjoy doing, and I'm curious, to kind of see how else I can continue to incorporate it into my work.
Fantastic. Let's go on to the next image.
Oh, this is the big one.
So yeah, so tell us about this painting. Sort of give us the whole story, because I know that it connects to an exhibition you had prior to the Gantt show.
Right. Yeah. So this was a piece that was at in the consortium exhibition last year, and it originally that space, the walls are 10 meters high, so that's 32 feet. And for one of the walls, we couldn't quite figure out what should go there. And I was like, I think it would be really cool to just have like an unstretched piece, almost like a tapestry, kind of just water falling down the wall. And in theory, I was like, oh, that would be wonderful to have. But then the actual reality of having to do that was definitely a bit challenging, because I needed a space big enough to paint that. That canvas is like 36 feet in length. The only space that I had was my driveway here at home. And
Yes.
so that that was, it was very physically demanding. It's probably the most physically demanding piece that I've done. It was very rough on my body. um, and it took me 4.5 days to do it. But I'm really pleased with how it turned out. But it is definitely something that I probably will not do again, not at that size,
Yeah. Never,
because like I
never
said,
say
it was
never.
maybe not, but yeah, but it was, I enjoyed it, but it was definitely, it was very physically demanding. Yeah.
Sure. And so obviously with every work that you create, there is a journey that you must go on in terms of thinking about the title
Mhm.
and thinking about like what you're going to bring to this work that's different from things you've done in the past. But I also
Mhm.
think there's like a learning that happens as well. I mean, you mentioned like, oh, you never want to do this again because, it was so like physically demanding. But I'm also sure that through that process, you learn some things about yourself too, right? Like, your sort of physical limits or how to
Mhm.
get past what you perceived as being physical limits. I'd
Yes,
just love
yeah.
to hear a moment about that before we move on to the next image.
Yeah, I mean, definitely for me, painting teaches me a lot about myself. And that's both physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, right? Like my painting practice is really an exercise in self-study, right? First and foremost. And it will reveal things to me that, maybe I wasn't previously aware of. There are plenty of things that I've painted where, in the middle of it or at the end, I look at it and I'm like, I don't know where this came from. And I'll have to sit with it or sit back and kind of just think about it. And it'll reveal itself. It'll point me towards, the place where it originated. And so I'm always learning new things. I'm always learning how to push myself further. um, I think especially as a person with chronic illness, and I contend with disability. um, my physical body is something that I have a fraught relationship with. And so painting is a way for me to contend with that, and contend even with at times like my own sense of self-worth, and self-image, and also even to like my own mortality, right? Like I grapple with a lot when I'm painting, because it is so physically demanding for me. I question, um, even now, I question, how long will I be able to paint in the way that I do, right? Like I'm constantly thinking about, how can I build more accommodation into my practice, into the studio, so that I can continue painting for as long as physically possible.
Mm. That's great. Well, with that, let's go on to the next image because I'm realizing we're at the halfway mark here of our time
Okay.
today. So time is moving fast.
It is.
So
Yes.
maybe the same. Like, give us a little background here.
Yeah, so this piece, so like I mentioned, most of the works at the Gantt are from like the last 2 to 3 years. But out of that group, this piece is the newest one. And I painted it um, in the same fashion that I painted the works for the London show. So the works for the London show, I took a different approach to painting the bases and the backgrounds. For the last, like, 5 to 8 years, I've been sticking primarily to more monochrome, solid backgrounds for my paintings. And I had started to get really bored with that. I found myself late last year and early this year, kind of really bored with that, and trying to look for, ways to bring more novelty to my process. And, how can I continue painting, but, kind of push it further. And so I started doing washes of color. So taking paint and really like thinning it out, watering it down, and just taking these really soft bristled brushes, and applying like multiple layers of washes of colors. And, again, because I was reading these reading works about, uh, you know, um, kind of like darker subject matter, the dark feminine. Um, I was really wanting to kind of evoke this sense of being immersed or grounded in like the underworld, right? Or like going really deep within yourself. And so,
Mhm.
a lot of the bases that I started using were very dark in color. And so this is an example of that. This piece I really love because it feels kind of spooky. I painted it while listening to a Prince song. It's called The Dance Electric. It's a B-side. And he's talking about kind of how the world as we know it is ending, but we'll make it through if we, join together and dance together, and, we dance electric. And so that was really a big inspiration for this piece.
Thank you. Let's go to the next image, and maybe you could just take a moment and talk a little bit about the influence of music into your work, because I think that's a big part of the story. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Music is something that, I'm always moving in the studio. Movement is such a big part of my process. So music helps with that. I'll put my headphones on, and, I have lots of playlists. I listen to a lot of different types of artists. But I primarily will go back to things that I grew up listening to. So Prince was a huge influence for me. Anyone who worked with Prince, I grew up listening to. So, I will go back to the things that I remember in my youth, across genres, and I'll put that music on, and I allow that music to, kind of transport me back in time to different memories, and, the not just the memories themselves, but the emotions tied to those memories. What was I feeling in that moment? What was I thinking? And, I kind of channel all of that, and that, winds up coming out onto the canvas in some way, shape, or form.
So this work we're looking at now is, you know, obviously quite dark. I mean, literally, but also figuratively,
Yeah.
in many ways. And I'm just curious to know, like, is this a new direction for you, or is this just something you're sort of like unpacking in the moment?
I would say that it's a mix of both, honestly. I found myself after, I did the works for the consortium exhibition. I felt very like emptied out. But at the same time, when I returned to the studio, a couple of months after that show opened, I found that, a lot of the grief and the rage that I've had, still wanted release, still wanted an outlet. And, I mean, considering all that we have going on, both, not just in the country, but around the world, like Solange said in one of her songs, I got a lot to be mad about. And so, taking that and, trying out new color palettes, leaning into darker colors, leaning into things that feel more moody, that feel a bit heavier, was definitely cathartic for me. And I really have relished it. Um, it has felt very satisfying and gratifying for me, to kind of like really lean into that. So I do think that it's something that is going to stick around for a while. I don't think it's just a one off. In a sense, I think this is something that is definitely going to continue on for a while, because I still feel like I'm still very much in this energy, and it feels very grounding for me to be in this place, and to, like, even looking at this piece right now, like I feel like I want to just crawl inside of it. Like it feels very indicative of where I am energetically, mentally, and emotionally.
Wow. Wow. Let's go to the next image.
Mhm. So again, very dark, very dark.
I think
Um,
there's something, well, dark is obviously the first word that I mentioned, and I'm sure a
mhm,
word that most people would probably, use when they initially look at these paintings. But at the
mhm,
same time, the paintings also still have the characteristics of some of your other work that wouldn't be categorized as dark. I think there's just a different way of approaching, like approaching painting that's going on here. The other thing I
mhm.
find compelling about these works is like, I guess going back to music as an analogy or comparison rather makes sense because some of the best songs are not upbeat songs, right? Some of the
Right.
most like memorable songs across genre. I mean, whether that's anything from
Mhm.
classical to hip hop. At least I can speak for myself. The songs that I love, the things that resonate with me, and the things I listen to frequently wouldn't necessarily be the things that other people would listen to per se. I
Right.
because I think
Right.
that when someone's pouring their heart out
Mhm.
into something, whether it's blues or hip hop or classical, when someone's really pouring their heart out, I connect with that. Like to me, like
Yes.
I love going beneath the surface and
Definitely.
almost being
Mhm.
brought to tears and encountering someone else's creativity. Like that to me is the sort of the pinnacle of having a relationship with art is when it like truly does something to you physically just to encounter it, right?
Mhm.
And
Definitely,
so I
yeah.
love the fact that you're like taking this, I guess for lack of a better word, it's kind of a risk too, right? Making work
It
that's
is.
not so easy to digest, not so quick to sort of judge as, oh, that's a great painting because, I love the colors. It just pops, like that kind of thing where someone
Right.
has to understand a little bit more about what you're saying.
Right. And like it's definitely heavier. It's definitely the other thing about these works in this show is that, you know, I'm 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 not just letting out rage, but I'm also, contending with midlife, with perimenopause, with, all of these experiences that don't often really get talked about. And especially when it comes to women and femmes and our emotions, we're very heavily policed. And our emotional expression is very heavily tone policed, and restricted, and doesn't really dominate conversations. And so these works are also about that as well, about kind of like letting that out, and giving space to that, and kind of staking a claim and saying, like it's these things are worth um, engaging with, they're worth expressing. There's value in it. And I've just have found a lot of satisfaction in being able to just kind of pour it out in this way. And using these darker colors, and these different types of references.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, it's a different note, right? We can advance to the next image.
the
And
reds are my
so this
favorite.
am I seeing a sort of a different element on this work? Is that a sort of a mixed media element on the surface?
Yes. So something that I experimented with earlier on in my practice, like around 2015, 2016, was stitching and applying fabric to my works. And it's kind of an idea that I did a few works, and then I kind of like put it to the side and didn't revisit it again until this year. I went back and looked at those works, and also, because again, I'm thinking about the body, I'm thinking about things falling apart and then being put back together. And so I pulled out embroidery thread and my upholstery needles, and I ripped up this like a couple of like sheer curtain panels that I had, and I dyed them with some inks and paint that I had on hand. And I you know found ways to stitch some of those pieces into the works for the show in London.
And this deep red, it seems to
Mhm.
kind of appear in quite a bit of your work. Is there some relationship to that color? Is there like a deep relationship to that color? Or is it just something that you, or is it just sort of coincident?
I think it's a combination of things. One, it's in terms of like where I live, we have a lot of red maple trees here that have these very dark, vivid, maroonish reds that I really love. Literally, like right outside my studio, and then also these shades of red again remind me so much of the body of blood, bones, marrow, the flesh, right? And so there's that element of it. And then also too, like I said, a lot of these works touch on feminine rage and the power and the liberation that comes from embodying it and expressing it. And so I wanted to evoke that sense. And so I definitely did many, many layers of different shades of red, mixing it with some grays and with some different shades of black, like carbon black, bone black, graphite gray. And like I said, like three or four different reds to kind of like build up um, uh, that base color.
And so let's advance to the next. We have about four more images, and I'm keeping an eye on the time here because
Okay.
for some reason today's conversation just seems to be going by so quickly. I'm
It
not sure
is.
because we're down to like less than 15 minutes now, but that's
Okay.
good. That's good. I mean, that's a good sign. That's a good sign. So this is very, very different from the works that I've known you to make, and certainly works you've made in the past few years. So I'm curious to hear about this painting.
Yeah, so this one it's interesting. So of course we have the fabric elements where again I took these old paint rags that I'd been using to paint with over the last like year, and wound up stitching them to the canvases at the end. But initially, this is a triptych, so it's 3 panels, and I was doing going through that same process of just doing multiple layers of washes of different colors, and kind of like building those up to see what they would look like. And um, when I got to this stage of it, um, I looked at it and I didn't want to actually paint anymore. I wanted to just leave it. And this is really interesting to me because for the last like 2.5 to 3 years, I have had in the back of my mind, this desire to uh, do more works like this that are still a lot of color, still a lot of layers, maybe some trace marks here or there, but are definitely just more sparse. And I've held back on doing that. Um, Kind of waiting for the right time. But when I got to this one and I was sitting with it and I was looking at it, I was like, okay, no, I think this one is just fine as is. It doesn't need any other types of marks. And in the show, in the group of works that it's in, I feel like it's you go down into the depths and you're in the dark, but then as you start to kind of like rise back up, you're kind of like in this womb space, right? You're in this liminal space, in this birthing space. And so that's really what this piece evokes for me. is that, being kind of in that womb space, just before you break through the surface, just before you, are reborn, you do resurrect. But, there's still elements of, again, it being a very bloody bodily process, right? Because, due to the colors. So this is actually one of my favorites out of the
Yeah.
group.
And just approximate scale, just to give some grounding on that. What the length and width?
So 78 height, and then uh oh, I believe each one is, see, now I feel bad because I can't remember, but they're like they're
By,
like eight.
yeah, I mean, yeah, it's quite large. So if it's roughly 7 feet high, let's call it that, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so then it must be what,
I think it's like
18?
90.
So anyway,
Yeah, yeah, it's like
uh,
it's like around there. They were pretty big. Um, but then yeah, I have like they definitely like I had to paint them when I was doing like the layers of colors. Like I would have to lay them out in my driveway. Like they wouldn't really fit all next to each other on one wall in my studio. So
right, right. Let's go to the next image.
it's one of the softies.
So I see
Yeah.
this is like hanging on a hook. Is it sort of what you were referencing earlier?
Yes, so this is, I got these cast iron metal J hooks, and so in the show they're actually drilled into the wall. So the hook is
Mhm.
actually drilled into the wall, and then the actual soft sculpture piece is like draped onto the hook. And so, yeah, this is, I took some nylons, different colors, but colors again that represent or that, would make you think of meat or, like an organ, and filled them with kinetic sand, different colors. Some of them some of it I dyed, and filled it with kinetic sand, kind of shaped it into, different shapes, and then did some stitching with some embroidery thread around the outside. There's a paint cloth in the background there that's also attached to the hook. So it's the hook, then the paint cloth, and then the actual soft sculpture piece. So it's technically three pieces in one, but I wanted to bring this kind of juxtaposition between hard and soft with these works, because one of the things that came up for me as I was uh, doing these pieces was a lot of my grandmother's story, and thinking about the ways in which she had to harden herself in order
Mm.
to survive. And I remember having conversations with my mom where she was talking about how, uh, my mom and her siblings, they always describe my grandmother as hard. And she was saying that she doesn't really recall uh, where, my grandmother was soft, outside of gardening. Gardening seemed to be like her soft thing, the thing in her life that, she kind of
Mm.
allowed herself to soften in. And so that juxtaposition between hard and soft, I wanted to bring that into the work, and kind of speak to the things that harden us as we go through life, and kind of the work that we have to do to remain soft, or to even reclaim softness for ourselves, or even ancestrally, like for our lineages.
Fantastic. Yeah, yeah. Well, I think this is a really interesting direction for you. In the, it sort of frees you up from having to sort of approach every day thinking about these large canvases and how you're going to tackle them. There's like a intimacy to this smaller work that I quite like.
Mm.
And it's not to say that it's not labor intensive, because don't put a needle and thread in my hands. I wouldn't really know what to do with it. Not really. But but the point is, I think it's always great for an artist to have different modes of making,
Yeah.
because it kind of gives you also like mental breaks and mental space to sort of exercise
Right.
different muscles,
Right.
which is like really important to do. And also, this is the kind of work I'd imagine. It's you could be on a road trip working on these. Like
Right.
you don't have to be in the studio, which is a
Right.
different
Like,
sort of
yeah.
and engaging practice.
Yeah, like these I was able to do like here in my bedroom, right? Like, kind of sitting down, having something on the TV or listening to something, on in my headphones, and just, it is quieter. It is definitely more intimate. And again, it is also therapeutic because you're working with your hands.
Right.
So it definitely was it was very grounding for me in a way that I didn't anticipate, but I really enjoyed. So I'm curious to see, how this continues to evolve for me. I'm, uh, thinking through, what else can I do with them?
I think the next image is the final image.
The yarn.
Yeah. Is that right, or is there one more? Maybe there's one more. But nevertheless, let's kind of talk about these self sculptures. Now we're down to the final like couple of minutes, so we'll keep it brief.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. So these are yarns, ropes essentially that I hand crocheted. So again, working with my hands, something that I'm able to do, like while I'm in the bed, watching TV, in the car. I taught myself how to, just do a simple rope, and doing hand crocheting, and these are, I can't even remember how long each one is, but it's a lot of yarn, and the yarn is has like a velvet covering, and it's filled with polyfill, so it's very soft and it's very chunky and it's very big. And I just get a kick out of playing with it and working with it. But the one of the things that I love about it is that it looks very light, and it is, and it's very soft, but when you start working with it, it gets heavy. And so
Right.
again, I like that juxtaposition between, something being light and soft, but also being heavy at the same time. Like for me, that's it really kind of relates to what I some of the things that I believe about healing and like the recovery processes. Tony Cade Bombara has a quote in one of her books, The Salt Eaters, where she says, it's a whole lot of weight being well. Wholeness has a lot of weight, and so these sculptures for me are representative of that. They're soft and they're light, and they're comforting, and they're very healing, but they are definitely hefty. they're not. They're a lot to hold. They're a lot to bear.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for sharing that. We can go to the what is the final image. And this has been a great conversation, because I think it was really an opportunity to feel like we're in your studio. I think like this was
I
this
love
was
that.
really good. I was happy that we were able to really like focus on the work and the thought process behind the work. I mean, I think in this day and age, with artists, and certainly, I could say this about, a lot of artists, we can sometimes get so caught up in the sort of like the theory, or the like the or the
Hmm.
bio and history of the artist and their life and everything, and almost like not spend enough time talking about the actual
The
work
actual work.
that they're
Yes.
they're making, right?
Yeah, the actual processes. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So thank you for that. And I know this is certainly not our first conversation, and it certainly won't be our last conversation. But with that said, I'd love to just give you a moment if there's any final thought or thing you'd like to share before I kind of give my final words for today.
Yeah, no, I just want to thank everyone for coming out. Thank you for, listening to what I have to say and share. Thank you for Dexter for, really great questions. And, I really enjoyed being able to talk about the new works, especially. I think they're definitely a departure from what people might be used to from me. So I'm really excited about it. And, again, I love talking process. So this was really enjoyable. And, my website is posted in the chat. So you could definitely check it out there. I have some performances on there. I've updated my website recently. So there's a lot of new content you can check out and, follow me on Instagram and go see the show at the Gantt.
Excellent. So, with that, I'll get to my final words. The Gantt Center's goal is always to provide programs that inform and inspire. The support of viewers like you allows the Gantt to expand its reach and further develop programs like today's Open Air. You can lend your support to the Gantt Center by using pardon me, visiting ganttcenter.org/donate. Again, that's ganttcenter.org/donate. Also, be sure to like and subscribe to this channel for future programs and other video content updates. We want to thank you all for joining us for another great conversation, and we look forward to next month's Open Air with artist Adama Delphine Fawando. Have a great and safe evening. Goodbye.
All right, good show. Let me finish it out.